Um, so I see Michael heading this way, and I am so delighted to be able to introduce and welcome Michael Kades to give a keynote address. He is a Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Antitrust Division with a focus on civil enforcement. He worked as antitrust counsel for Senator Klobuchar on detail from the FTC. He's thought a lot about competition in the healthcare space over the years, and I've been in Washington a long time, and Michael has been a friend for a very long time. And one thing I know about him is he truly cares about the public interests, and he spends a lot of time thinking about and making sure that antitrust enforcement works for all the people across the country, not just urban but rural, not just Democrat but Republican, not just blue collar or white collar but blue collar. And I really admire his dedication and commitment to working for every type of citizen in the country. And I said the same thing with Jonathan, the same thing about Michael. It's so fun to be able to invite your friends to speak at a conference, and then they get to talk to your audience, and that's just like makes me be very grateful about what we've done here at the Capitol Forum. And so please give Michael a warm welcome. Thank you.
Well, Teddy, thank you so much for that undeserved introduction. But as someone who will be looking for a job sooner, I will be quoting that. I'm going to put it on the back of my business card. No, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's an honor. And I obviously know Teddy a long time as well, and he has been someone who really has focused on issues that are near and dear to my heart relating to competition. So it's great to be able to come and address this group. So I'm going to start with a story. You can ask my siblings whether it's true or not, or how true it is. But in general, my father was a really even-keeled businessman. Nothing ever seemed to rock him. I remember this one time, my parents were on vacation, and I was left working at the auto parts store, Kades Auto Parts. And during that week, a competitor, Sieg, won the business from one of the repair shops in town. But it wasn't just any repair shop. It was a business that had done business with Kades Motor Parts for decades. And over the course of the week, everybody who worked, I mean, it's a small business, but everybody all they could talk about is, if we can't keep Beeline frame and axle, how can we stay in business? And they had me terrified. Right? And so my parents come home Sunday night. I rush out, Dad, gotta get them, right? This was before we had cell phones, right? So you actually couldn't talk to people when they were necessarily across the country. Gotta give them this news, like, this is a disaster. So I, probably in a high-pitched, rapid voice, explained everything that's happened. My dad looked at me and he goes, "Thank you. Can you get the bags, and how are you doing?" And I'm like, how am I doing? I didn't say this. Dad, you're going belly up. We'll probably lose the house. I'm not going to college. What kind of question is that? And I honestly don't know what happened the next day. Because I was working and I was delivering to delivering parts to customers, and would I ever get a chance to go to deliver to Wisconsin Power and Light again? Would I be embarrassed when we walked around the block and we saw the Mr. Budweiser, who was a great customer, or would I ever deliver to Matt Thorson at Thorson Shell? And I was a wreck. That night, I said to my dad, "So what happened with Beeline?" And he literally looked at me for like 10 seconds. I was like, oh yeah. So what I did was I made them a better offer. They're back with us, and then I took two of Sieg's customers. And that was it. No big deal. Just move along. Just day in life in a businessman. It's also, that's competition, right? That whole Looking back now, Sieg isn't quite the villain they were when I was growing up, but that was part of the process that made everyone better off. But I have to say there's one issue that that plagued my father his entire year. And it happened on every day. It wasn't Christmas. It was the day the healthcare broker presented the cost of his healthcare plan. And this man, who normally nothing fazed him, he would just come home and he would be destroyed. Like, he'd be, every time, I don't understand, why are my healthcare costs going up? And he actually had lots of, he saw no good guys in this. Right? He's like, the hospitals and the doctors, they keep raising their fees, they keep providing services, but the insurers, like, they're just raising our deductibles, raising our premiums, like, and why won't Congress fix this? In that he wasn't that different than most Americans, I suppose. And he could have done what his competitors did, which was every year make that healthcare, shift that cost to his employees, provide fewer benefits, require higher out-of-pocket payments. He didn't. He didn't because he thought healthcare was a right. And if the federal government wasn't going to provide people with healthcare, he would do his part to make sure his employees had $1 coverage. And so every year he had to find a way to rearrange his business. For a while it was he would trick trick the brokers. He would get the brokers to offer him a teaser rate, knowing full well the next year he was not going to stay with them because they were going to raise the rate. And then eventually it got to the point where the only thing he could do was he would buy the cheapest, the lowest cost plan with the really high deductible, and he would then, out of pocket, part of above their salary, just pay all of their out of pocket costs. And this story, this wasn't going on. When did this crisis start? This wasn't happening during the debate over the Affordable Care Act. My dad was retired and enjoying the fruits of his work. And it didn't begin during the Clinton era debate. And it didn't even begin in the 80s. My memory of these yearly nights of pain and suffering that my dad experienced, they go back to the 70s. That's how long we have struggled with healthcare and finding a way to provide high quality, low cost healthcare. So I thought what I wanted to do today is talk about what role competition plays here. And I think there's sort of three views people have. Sometimes people see competition as the villain in the healthcare debate. Sometimes it's a victim to be sacrificed for larger good. And it will not surprise you, I see competition as potentially a hero in this area. So let's start with the villain. So why might competition be the villain? So here's one example. Back in the 1970s, right, the medical world, the hot issue was this thing called the medical arms race. And the thinking was, if you had two hospitals competing in a locality, for example, one gets the fancy new MRI machine, or maybe it was the CAT scan at that point, then the other one felt like they had to get it. So they both increased their costs, and now they both wanted, they now got to pay for it, so they're going to pressure everyone to order as many CAT scans as possible. That was the problem. That's what was driving healthcare costs. And the solution was, we're going to have the government regulate entry. Right? We don't want competition. We literally do not want competition because it leads to this medical arms race. And so states across the country passed these things called certificate of need laws. The idea was, like, the state would decide whether you wanted to form an outpatient surgery center. You had to go to the state. There was a regulatory process. Guess who opposed it? Every single time, the incumbent healthcare provider was like, what are you talking about? Everything's fine. Why would you want more healthcare in this county? I think by this point, there's no one left who believes certificate of need laws helped control healthcare costs. They actually helped increase them. So the second story is called what I like to call the villain story. And in this view of the world, there's an acknowledgement that healthcare markets perform poorly for a variety of reasons. They're atomized. When you get care, you have to go to 14 doctors. They don't bother to talk to each other. You repeat your medical history over and over again, and they still don't seem to remember it 5 minutes later. If your doctor has graduated 30 years ago, they may not know when the most recent treatment is. And so there's lots of inefficient care being provided. And the solution in this story, you have to integrate the care, right? And so there are examples of this. This is what Kaiser Health does, Mayo Clinic. And in this view, it's not necessarily competition's bad, but if integrating care is what's going to solve the problem, we should be okay with consolidation, because the promises that form will deliver outweigh the costs of competition. I think the question for that is, we have tried that periodically every 10 or 15 years. In the 80s, we called it HMOs. In the 2013, it was the accountable care organizations. Today, the words are things like value-based care. And by the way, I'm not criticizing any of this. I'm just saying we have tried this, and the results we haven't seen results. So here's the final story. In the debate over healthcare, right, some people really believe in socialized medicine, right? Bernie Sanders, whole country, United Kingdom, that's a policy decision, right? And then some people believe it should be a market and it should be competition. But generally, in reality, both those systems, we don't have a pure system either. We have the VA, we have Medicare, we have Medicaid. We do all sorts of things where the government is involved in healthcare. Turns out, if you look at the UK, they have been trying to introduce forms of competition precisely as ways to help control costs or actually improve care. So we're somewhere on this spectrum. What I've never heard anyone say is, you know who should decide healthcare? Large private companies that are motivated solely by profit. Right? Creating market, I've never said, everyone seems to think that the role of the healthcare system, we should have a healthcare system where competition has little to no role in disciplining how market actors work. Right? That would kind of be like privatized, socialized medicine. And so in this story, competition is a hero. Right? Because regardless of how you want to set your policy, you need competition so that individuals within that system or actors can't subvert it. And I think one thing, what I want to do is take a step back and explain why I think this is so important in this industry to understand how difficult getting this right is, which is something either I forgot somebody else wrote or I'll take it for myself, is healthcare involves what we might call the fractured consumer. Right? So in this sense, when I go to the marketplace and I'm going to buy soda pop, I look at the Pepsi, I look at the Coke. I decide, I mean, they're always the same price, but let's pretend there may be a price difference. I decide whether I want to pay that. I buy it, comes out of my pocket. I drink it, and then I decide, is that price worth paying the next time? That's a very sort of simple market. And it's very easy to have competition work. Let's compare that to what happens in your average healthcare transaction. I get sick. I have no idea if I'm really sick. I have no idea what's going to fix me. I go to my doctor. The doctor looks at me, and she's going to diagnose the problem, and she's going to decide what care she thinks I need. But she probably has no idea about the cost of that care, right? Because that depends on what my insurance plan says, which in turn depends on what my employer has purchased as insurance. So that the version of me in that story actually at least involves 6, 7, 8 different people making decisions. The challenge is In that kind of market where you have this web of decision making, every one of those nodes is a place where if you have market power, the whole system falls apart. And the worst part is, right, that means that even when we enforce the antitrust laws, if we fix the problem at one node, so we bring a case, as FTC brought a lot of cases in the aughts, going after physician practices who were basically price fixing. Even if you solve that, if there's a problem with PBMs, if there's a problem in insurance markets, you're not going to see any benefits. I mean, a year ago at this conference, my colleague Andy Foreman explained, he said, you know, companies in the ecosystem do not appear to dispute that there are competitive problems in the industry. Rather, they appear to be focusing on blaming each other for the competitive ills. I think the answer, right, yes, exactly. The problems are everywhere. And you might see the the history of health reform efforts in this country as a way to try to align these incentives. Sure, we have all these decision makers, but can we create a system where they all end up having the conflict and incentives creates a system where the decision making yields the same result as if one person was really paying the full costs and receiving the full benefits. Right, and this is directly related to this fragmented consumer, right? Because take healthcare, and I don't want anyone to think I'm morally condemning anybody. It's just people act on their incentives. I do. But healthcare providers are likely to, prioritize providing care. Insurers are likely to prioritize controlling costs. What we need is balancing those two. That's what, when you make a purchasing decision, you need to balance cost versus benefits. And that calculation is impossible to perform if the decision maker receives the benefits but doesn't bear the costs or vice versa. So today the buzzword is integration, value-based care. However, in a broad sense, these ideas aren't that different than the notions of HMOs, accountable care organizations, or others. These all can be seen as different ways to try to, again, eliminate these conflicts that occur amongst the many decision makers. And the principles of these reforms have remained remarkably consistent, right? That one thing you need to do is you got to get some way to create bargaining power on the buy side, right? Individuals, there would never be a market where like you're gonna have emergency care and you're gonna be on the phone. Wait, what's the admission price? Okay, hold on. What's the admission price, right? I mean, that just is never gonna happen, right? And so the idea makes, insurers, by delivering volume, can negotiate prices that help control costs. Second thing that we have struggled with for decades is paying for performance is what we want, right? What we want out of a healthcare system is people to minimize costs and maximize outcomes, right? We want to see a system where there's less, right? So and so the difference is, right, we're not interested, it's not if there are more x-rays, that's a sign of the output increasing and it's a wonderful market and we're done, right? We care about how healthcare, for example, lowers infant mortality rates or improves and extends the lives people live. And so the integration, as I said, is a way to try to bridge that gap. The industry is, in turn, turning to consolidation to achieve integration. Insurers are purchasing provider practices and pharmacy benefit managers, and instead of standalone hospitals, we have hospital systems growing and often providing healthcare plans themselves or buying outpatient services or other are also buying providers. And even CVS, right, now owns both healthcare providers and Aetna. Right, so the idea, right, is here by putting all those decision makers in one house, that should allow you to better balance costs and benefits, internalize the costs and benefits, and addresses a key problem that has plagued the industry. On the other hand, that paragraph I just read sounds a little bit eerily like the ending of George Orwell's Animal Farm, where the pigs are looking in on the dinner between the farm animals are looking in, and there's a dinner with the pigs and the humans, and they look to the pigs, and they look to the humans, and they look back to the pigs, and they can't tell the difference. And really what this is Jonathan Cantor, my boss, recently explained, healthcare companies are becoming platforms and can control the interactions between patients and providers, among providers, and between providers and pharmacies, and every other interaction. We are looking at companies that sit between every single part of the transaction that makes up healthcare. So why does competition matter in this developing ecosystem? First, this current integration may not succeed. I mean, I know that's kind of, I'm kind of out there, but we have yet to crack that nut. And if it fails and we have allowed mass consolidation, we will be left having none of the benefits we thought we were getting by sacrificing health competition, just the costs of allowing firms to achieve monopoly rents. But even if the integration does pay off, without competition, patients who receive the care and their employers, including the United States government, will not benefit if it means pervasive market power exists in the system. Because once a party has market power, what they will do, in a free market, it's absolutely right, is to extract the benefits of that. So if you want the patient to get the benefits, it's competition that ensures that. So really, my view, regardless of your policy views, competition has to be the hero here. It's no small task. Effective antitrust understanding requires understanding how healthcare markets work, how the regulatory overlay affects parties' incentives, and where, given that structure, competition is most vulnerable. In other words, if we take as a given that integration is the goal of healthcare reform, where would we expect that the system to fall apart? And again, I'm now going to quote liberally from Jonathan, even though he's never going to give me another job performance review. But one area is integration can create what we would call multi-level entry problems. Right? If a company has market power in one level of the healthcare ecosystem, entry may already be difficult in that market. But if a company can acquire companies across the healthcare ecosystem, it can further shield itself from entry. We see healthcare companies vertically integrating into a healthcare stack. Multi-level entry can create a moat protecting market power. I want to be clear here again, I'm not talking about any cases or investigations. I'm just saying that's the fear we should be that is a fear we should be focusing on. Second, monopsony power. As healthcare companies consolidate and blur the lines between insurers and providers, and including employees, independent practices, and tell the part I'm taking from Jonathan. But this one actually wasn't, so full disclosure, I just tripped over myself. As healthcare companies consolidate and blur the lines between insurers and providers, employees, independent practices, or hospitals may suffer. Right? If you have market power on the buy side, fancy word being monopolist, monopsonist, and by the way, for those of you who know, the person who came up with this term is arguably the most important economist not to win the Nobel Prize, and it will surprise nobody in this room. It was a female. So, and, just a little factoid I like to share. But the way the monopsonist works in the market, right, is they reduce demand for labor so they can pay less. Either maybe they hire less people, wages don't rise as fast, working conditions get worse. But we're talking about healthcare. Healthcare is like the way in which they are deteriorating the supply of labor is directly going. It is going to be particularly problematic in healthcare because it is the providers who are critical to the care you receive. So we should be especially cautious about monopsony problems in these markets. And before anyone misinterprets that statement, since someone recently did, I'm not saying that, for example, that the inappropriate acquisition of monopsony power or abuse of it is a problem only if it harms downstream consumers. That is not my claim. It is that these particular types of monopsony power problems have a ripple effect that are particularly problematic. Now I want to turn to another area where integration may lead to competitive problems is what you might call conflicts of interest. With the development of healthcare platforms and stacks, conflicts of interest become more likely. Firms with dominant positions choose their own healthcare stack and exclude independent rivals. Finally, there's what we might call regulatory gamemanship. One of the reasons that healthcare companies may be expanding could be to circumvent the regulatory environment. Try to be careful when I'm not talking to antitrust nerds to not talk like an antitrust nerd. Let you be the judge of how well I've done that today. I guess here's an area where you actually are more the nerd than me, because I'm going to talk about healthcare regulation a little bit. But right, the Affordable Care Act requires insurers to spend at least 80 to 85% of their premiums on providing care, what we call the medical loss ratio. It exists to try to create the incentive for the insurer to actually want to limit their ability to underprovide on care. Here's the rub. If I'm an insurer and I buy providers, the price I pay my providers is a phantom price. It's a transfer price, but it counts as a cost. So what I can do, in theory, is I pay my provider groups a lot of money. That increases my costs. And then on the back end, because I own the providers, they end up having to pay me a share of that. So really what I'm doing is turning my profit into something that looks like a cost and allows me to avoid having to get around the medical loss ratio. So turning now to competition and antitrust, since I'm standing here at the end of an administration rather than the beginning, I wanted to talk a little bit about what we've done and what I think where we go in the future. And I'm not going to talk about our healthcare cases and litigation because my colleague, litigation dag, Hedel Doshi, would kill me. But I am going to try to reflect a little bit on how the Biden administration enforcement agenda has developed tools to address the threats I have discussed. First, both the Antitrust Division and the Federal Trade Commission have made a priority to address harms to suppliers, including workers, what we might view as a monopsony power problem. Right? At the DOJ, we successfully blocked Penguin's attempt to acquire Simon & Schuster based on the potential harm to certain authors, not about increasing the price of books. In United States versus Cargill, we obtained a consent decree based on allegations that sharing compensation information amongst a group that accounted for 80% of chicken processing in the United States suppressed compensation for poultry plant workers. Then in the United States versus Cook Foods, we again obtained a consent decree addressing penalties that Cook Foods was imposing on chicken growers if they tried to leave Cook and work for a different processor. Those enforcement actions and others have established that labor concerns do matter in antitrust law. Labor issues are not a unicorn, and has, I think, helped build institutional strength or muscles about how to think and analyze these questions. Second, the new merger guidelines, which have already been cited in 9 cases approvingly, remind the world that Section 7 covers mergers that may substantially lessen competition, not just horizontal mergers that meet certain HHI thresholds or a very narrow sliver of vertical mergers. Instead, the guidelines ask whether proposed mergers enhance or entrench market power. Those are precisely the types of concerns I was just talking about. And establishing that the question is the impact on competition, not tunnel vision view of structural analysis, I think puts the agencies in better position to protect competition. Third, as some of you might have caught, our cases challenging dominant platforms raise many of the same concerns I just addressed. And so again, I think building the expertise to think about competition in different ways, I think lays the groundwork for better antitrust enforcement. So for too long, competition has been a villain that undermines healthcare or a victim that's needed to be sacrificed for the greater good. Unless we understand that competition is part of the solution, the same frustrations that plagued my father as a small businessman will continue to plague the country. So this is likely my last speech as a Biden administration official. But it's been an honor of a lifetime to serve in the Justice Department, to serve with my fellow DAGs. But in this public forum, I want to specifically thank the career staff at the division. We came in with a very aggressive agenda, a bold agenda that required staff to work harder than they ever had, to grapple with more difficult questions, to be willing to learn and think about things in different ways. And you know what? They answered that call. The number of times I felt I would be calling staff on a Saturday or Sunday night and people would pick up the phone immediately or call me back and be totally unconcerned that I was infringing on their leisure time, and they weren't getting to bill for it, was amazing. Right, and so obviously our critics, we have critics and we have supporters, and they vigorously like to argue about whether our approach was right or wrong, what the ideology is. But as I reflect on my time, I kind of think at this point people are somewhat missing the point. We currently have 8 cases, 8 civil cases in litigation, and they are all substantial major antitrust actions. We have successfully brought criminal monopolization cases. We have successfully challenged mergers in industries where we had never done before, like airlines. And we have sections who have been in litigation since before I arrived, and continually so. So over the last 4 years, this antitrust division has shown its capacity is far greater than anyone thought. And that occurred only because we in leadership made unreasonable requests, and more importantly, the career staff answered that call. Their talent, diligence, and dedication made the division's accomplishments possible. They deserve far more of the credit than any of us in the front office. Underpaid and resource-strapped, they take on the biggest cases with the most well-funded opponents and continually outperform their performance. And this is what, they will be there long after I leave doing their job, and we all owe them a debt of gratitude. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't filibuster long enough. Sorry. So let me tell you about my first keynote.
You mentioned similarities with the platforms. You mentioned conflicts of interest. Do you think that those aspects of the problems that you're tackling in healthcare make it more likely that the focus will continue with the next administration?
So I don't want to predict the next administration, both in general and specifically. But look, I think it is very clear that the appointments that the president-elect have made are people who believe deeply in antitrust enforcement, who have raised these concerns about tech markets. And so, again, I'm not speaking for them, but it, you know, I think there is reason to believe that much of what we have done actually is bipartisan support and will continue.